Hey everyone, I'm James Lynch, and this is Early Look, the show where I take a look at an upcoming notable fight. And on today's edition, we got a good one. This is one of the best fights on paper in UFC history, the lightweight title fight, UFC 284, between champion Islam Makhachev and featherweight champion moving up, Alexander Volkanovski. But before I give you my preview and pick, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. You do those three things, it really does help out this channel big time. When this fight was announced, I had to do this one as early as possible. This is such an awesome matchup. The new lightweight champion, Islam Makhachev, welcoming Alex Volkanovski, like I mentioned. And Islam going into enemy territory, fighting in Alex Volkanovski's backyard in Perth, Western Australia. And it's going to be taking place February 11th in the main event of UFC 284, like I mentioned. If you've never watched the show before, basically, I go through a bunch of different stats, a little bit of intangibles, a little bit of everything. And then at the end, like I mentioned, I give you my preview and pick. Some of this stuff may matter, it may not. I'm just giving you a look at this fight from all different angles, the best I can. And at the end of this video, if you want to have a discussion about this fight, more than happy to do that. Okay, let's get into the champion, the lightweight champion defending his title for the very first time, Islam Makhachev. So you can see there, Islam Makhachev, 23-1 record. He has, I should say, 4 knockouts, 11 submissions, and 8 decisions. He's 31 years old. He's 5'10" with a 70.5-inch reach. Some of the advantages on paper that he'll have over Volkanovski in this fight: he's 3 years younger, and he's going to have a decent height advantage here, about 4 inches. He is 5'10" compared to 5'6" for Alex Volkanovski, the featherweight champion. Like I mentioned there, this will be the first title defense for Islam Makhachev. He's also a former combat sambo world champion. He trains at American Kickboxing Academy and Eagles MAM. He's got fight of the night bonus 1 time against Arman Tsarukyan. He's got performance of the night bonus 1 time against Charles Oliveira, which was his last fight. And check this stat out. He has the least significant strikes absorbed per minute in UFC history at 0.074. 0.74, I should say, 0.74, if I get my math correct. So you can just see just a dominant run for Islam Makhachev throughout his UFC career. Now, if you look at Islam's record, he did not have an amateur debut. He went straight to the pros. They do have this amateur listed fight here against Zabit Magomedsharipov. That was a Sambo fight. It wasn't an MMA fight. He actually made his professional debut back in August of 2010. So a long time he's been competing. Didn't make his UFC debut until May of 2015. Islam is 12-1 in the UFC. He's got 7 stoppage victories. Some notable wins include, nothing ranked, but Chris Wade at the time, I thought that was a good win for him, who was 11-2 at the time. Nick Lentz, a veteran, had a ton more experience than Islam in that fight, had a 27-7-2 record. You also had Arman Tsarukyan, who we know now, very good fighter. At the time of recording this, Arman's going to be fighting next week at UFC Fight Night, the last UFC card of the year. But still, Arman was 13-1 at the time. And then you have, obviously, the Davy Ramos fight. Davy Ramos, 10-2 as well. Drew Dober, Thiago Moises, who's still a very promising prospect in that weight class. Dan Hooker. Obviously, we know Dan, a ranked fighter. Bobby Green, and then obviously Charles Oliveira. Now, the Hooker and Green fights were on short notice. But the Charles Oliveira fight, full camp, and that's the biggest win of his career. And that's one of the things that was sort of going into that fight with Charles Oliveira was Islam had not fought a top 5 opponent yet. It didn't matter because he went out there and dominated Charles Oliveira and got the win. And to me, the Oliveira fight is one of those career-defining performances here. Again, we know how good Islam was, but he hadn't done it against the type of competition in the top 5. I mentioned some of those names, but again, you have to mention that the Oliveira win was just so much more significant compared to some of the other victories he got as well. You see there, he does have 1 loss. It was Adriano Martins back in 2015. That was a fight where he was knocked out in the very first round. It's one of those fights, every now and then you see fights, where sometimes a fighter gets caught. Just a prime example that comes to mind as well, Dustin Poirier when he fought Michael Johnson. You have other fights where, you just look back on the career and it's like, how did that happen? Stefan Struve beating Stipe Miocic. Adriano Martins is sort of in that same category. Nothing against him. And obviously it was a finish there, but it's one of those fights where, if they had a rematch, Islam probably wins that, no problem. So I mentioned the notable wins, notable losses there. As far as like injuries and layoffs and things like that, we'll get into that. So he had an injury against Drew Dober back in April of 2016. Makhachev testing positive for a banned substance at weigh-ins. Should mention he's never been tested or never busted since then. So we do have to mention that as well. That was at UFC on Fox 19, so that fight didn't take place. Then he was supposed to fight Michelle Prazeres. That was back in September of 2017. He suffered an injury in that fight. It was undisclosed. Then he's supposed to fight Francisco Trinaldo, January 2019. He was pulled from the fight due to undisclosed reasons. And then he's supposed to fight Rafael dos Anjos a second time, but he had an injury in that one. Dos Anjos pulling out of the first fight due to a COVID test. They're supposed to fight again, but Makhachev having an injury there in November of 2020. And then he's supposed to fight RDA again, but there's an injury on RDA side, and they're supposed to fight Beneil Dariush, and Dariush had an ankle injury as well. So, people talk about the fact that, obviously there's some key fights that Islam was supposed to have. A lot of it's just bad luck. Like I said, just the one time he had the injury on his end, and then the other times it was mainly his opponents who were getting injured as well. Islam, if you look at his career, even though he has had a few decision wins in his career, no controversial or close decisions. They've been decisive wins for him, so no controversies on the judges' scorecards. Volkanovski's had a few of those. We'll talk about that in a second here, but that's pretty much it for Islam Makhachev. Again, really dominant run, and then gets that step up against Oliveira, goes out there, dominates him, looks great, and gets the finish in that one. So again, a lot of momentum here for Islam Makhachev, who, like I said, has not lost a fight since May of 2015. It's been a long time. Okay, let's talk about the featherweight champion, Alex Volkanovski, who, again, going to be moving up a weight class. But if you've been following Volkanovski's career, he's actually fought at 155 before. He's fought as heavy as welterweight. So that's one thing we'll talk about here is the multiple weight classes that Volkanovski has competed in. You can see there, Alex Volkanovski, the UFC featherweight champion. He's 25-1. He's got 12 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 10 decisions. Volkanovski is 34 years old. He's 5'6" with a 71.5-inch reach. So if you look at it there, Volkanovski, the only advantage he has in this fight in terms of, on paper and physicality and all that, is that he's got a 1.5-inch reach advantage. That's it. Islam's got the height. Islam's got the youth. So that's on his side for sure. Volkanovski, I mentioned there, he's had 4 successful title defenses at featherweight. He's actually never lost in the UFC, which is very interesting. He's a BJJ black belt under Joe Lopez. He trains at City Kickboxing, Tiger Muay Thai, and Freestyle Fighting Gym. He was also the former Australian Fighting Championships featherweight champion. Pretty notable promotion over there. He's got Fight of the Night 2 times against Chad Mendes and Brian Ortega. He's got Performance of the Night 1 time against Chen Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie. He's tied with Arnold Allen for second longest win streak in UFC featherweight division history. And he's currently ranked on the UFC rankings. I don't make these up. That's just what the media does. Right now on the UFC rankings, he is currently ranked the #1 pound for pound fighter on that list. Very subjective list, obviously, because, there's a bunch of different things you could look at there. But yeah, Volk, #1 in that category. Got to mention that when you're talking about Alex Volkanovski. Now, if you look at it there, Alex Volkanovski did not have an amateur career as well. He went straight to the pros. That was back in May of 2012. So by the time Volkanovski had his first pro fight, Islam Makhachev already had 6 fights. So just get that for a bit of context there. Had his UFC debut in November of 2016 when he fought Mizuto Hirota. When he fought Yasuki Kasunya. And Islam had already had 2 UFC fights at that point. I mentioned it there. Volkanovski's never lost in the UFC. He's 12-0. He's got 4 stoppage wins. Some notable wins for Volkanovski. I'm going to include the Jeremy Kennedy fight because Kennedy was undefeated at the time, and Kennedy's actually had some decent success over in Bellator as well. Chad Mendes, former title challenger. That was a good win at the time. Jose Aldo, very good win at the time, especially considering what Aldo had done after that, right? Like we saw, obviously we know the losses to Holloway, but the success he's had at bantamweight, I mean, that is a very good win to have in the resume here for Alex Volkanovski. And then the Max Holloway fights. He's got 3 wins over Max Holloway. We'll talk about the second fight, which obviously was a bit controversial. The Brian Ortega fight, amazing performance in that one. Survived a very dangerous choke in that one, was able to get out of that one and win a decision there. And then the Korean Zombie fight, he finished the Korean Zombie, which is a very good feat because Zombie, if you look at it in most of his UFC career, he's not getting finished. So that was a really good win for him, finishing him there. Obviously not the Korean Zombie we've known from years past, but still to be able to go out there and finish him, very impressive performance. And then his last fight against Max Holloway, outstanding performance, no questions asked. He won that fight. It was a dominant win against a really good fighter in Max Holloway, who himself has a very good career. That's why I think this fight is one of the best in UFC history, because you got 2 guys in the prime of their career, and they're coming off 2 monumental wins: Islam over Oliveira, and then this win over Max Holloway. And obviously Islam finished Charles, but still, outside of getting a finish, that's about as good as it gets for a win in terms of Alex Volkanovski taking out Max Holloway there. And like I mentioned, no losses in his career. Now, Volkanovski's had some layoffs in his career. If you look at the layoff from Max Holloway to Brian Ortega, so that's the second Max Holloway to Brian Ortega fight, there was a 441-day layoff in that one. So going from July of 2020 to September of 2021, big layoff there. And then even from this fight, there's a bit of a layoff going into this one. So he fought Holloway in July of this year, the time of recording this. And by the time he steps in the cage with Islam Makhachev, there'll be a 224-day layoff. Now, every fighter's different when it comes to layoffs, but it's just something we have to mention here as well. No major injuries or anything like that. Just the one thing we do have to mention, he was supposed to fight Brian Ortega at UFC 260. He tested positive for COVID. Again, no injuries that have pulled him out of fights or anything like that. Any scheduled fights anyways. Volkanovski's been pretty active and pretty, healthy throughout his career in terms of injuries and all that. Okay, so the Max Holloway fights, I got to mention those. I'm not going to mention the last one because there wasn't really anyone who felt like Holloway won that last fight against Holloway, but the first two, let's look at that. So the first Max Holloway fight, UFC 245, Usman Covington. I was actually front row for that one in press row, seeing that fight. I clearly thought Volkanovski won, but I actually went back and looked at the scorecards here. So at UFC 245, 19 media members scored the fight for Volkanovski. So despite the fact it was a unanimous decision, I actually shouldn't say despite the fact, I was looking at the wrong fight there. My bad. The unanimous decision win, the media agreed on that one. If you go to MMA decisions, if you look it up, you'll see that 19 media members scored the fight for Volkanovski. No media members scoring the fight for Max Holloway. But in the rematch, July 2020, UFC 251, Usman versus Masvidal, split decision win. Went back and looked at the media scorecards for that one. 9 media members scoring the fight for Volkanovski, 18 media members scoring the fight for Holloway. So some people feeling like that fight should have gone Max Holloway's way. I got a lot of crap for saying this, but after that fight, I did think Volkanovski won. I can go through the reasons why in another video, but I felt like he did enough to get it done over Holloway. Some people feel like it was a robbery. The thing with robberies is that, from my point of view anyways, to me, a robbery is a fight where someone didn't even win a single round. Even if you thought Max Holloway won that fight, Volkanovski clearly won a couple of those rounds for sure. I don't think there's any denying that. So say what you want about that fight. It doesn't even really matter because the third fight proved everyone that, Volkanovski had 2 of the 3 wins that were clearly his. There was no controversy. I think that means he has Holloway's number, in my opinion. So again, that one fight, maybe it was an off night. And even Volk himself said he wasn't himself in that fight. Not making any excuses, but, who knows what was going on behind the scenes there. But again, a lot of people feeling like that should have gone Max Holloway's way. Do have to point that out. So maybe that's one loss on the resume for Volkanovski in the eyes of some people. We got to look at it there. Okay, let's get to the betting odds. Again, we've gone through all the stats. I know a little bit quickly, but these guys, again, there's not much to dissect too much because these guys don't have a ton of layoffs or anything crazy there. So you look at the odds right now, Islam about a 3-1 favorite. I think the odds are right where they need to be. I think this is a very, very tall task, no pun intended here, for Alex Volkanovski in this fight. Now, I should mention as well that, and actually I didn't mention this, I'm going to actually step back a little bit here before we get into the odds. Volkanovski has fought in multiple weight classes, and this is important for this fight because, again, you guys know how I feel. Usually when a fighter is moving up a weight class, I tend to favor the fighter. I tend, in general, moving up, moving down, whatever fighter is a mainstay in that weight class, I always feel like that's a certain advantage to that fighter because they've made the weight over and over again. To me, that should be a bit of an advantage here. I always point to the Jan Blachowicz and Israel Adesanya fight as a good example. Okay, so weight classes. I forgot to mention this in my notes here. Volkanovski's fought 5 times at welterweight at 170. That's one thing to note. This is going to be, he's fought 4 times at lightweight, 155, which is what this weight class is in. So this will be his 5th fight at lightweight. So Volkanovski, no stranger to fighting in the lightweight division. Obviously, when he was fighting at lightweight, nowhere close to the level of opposition of an Islam Makhachev. In fact, he's never fought outside of 145 in the UFC. So it's something to consider because obviously the competition he's fighting outside the UFC is not going to be as good as what he's going to be facing here in Islam Makhachev. And then he had one 150-pound catchweight fight, and then he's fought 16 times at 145. So majority of Volkanovski's career has been at featherweight, but we do have to bring up the fact that he has fought at welterweight, he's fought at lightweight, and this guy also used to be around 200 pounds when he was playing rugby. That's another thing to consider there. So a lot of strength in terms of his frame, but again, not a big guy. It's not like a 6-foot tall guy, cutting down to 145 like a Julian Erosa or someone, a Jalen Turner or someone like that that's really tall and lanky that's cutting down. He's just physically very strong. That's one thing to sort of keep in mind here. Anyways, back to the odds as I'm sort of talking here. Like I said, I think Islam should be a 3-1 favorite here because not only does he have the youth on his side, not only does he have the height, not only does he have the fact that he's just been running through opponents, including Oliveira, which I think the Oliveira win really sort of set the tone for the rest of his career in saying that he just beat one of the best fighters, one of the best lightweight fighters of all time, in my opinion, in Charles Oliveira. There was a really good win there. So you got to factor that in. And just the fact that he's been a mainstay at 155, whereas Volkanovski has not. So Volkanovski going to be moving up here. So how does this fight play out? That's going to be the interesting question here because here's the thing with Volkanovski. We've seen him in trouble before. I referenced the Ortega fight. Ortega had a really good submission on there. I'm watching that fight live, and I'm sure a lot of you were as well. And as I'm watching that fight, I'm thinking he's done. Ortega's got him. And he got out of it. That was so impressive. I'm a big believer in adversity, and Volkanovski certainly had that in his career from not only that fight, but also just, there was that narrative of Max Holloway's the uncrowned champ. Imagine dealing with that mentally, people saying that you're not really the champ. He's been through a lot, man, and he's proven a lot of people wrong. I'm a big Volkanovski fan. He is a guy that has, like I said, proved his doubters wrong, and is someone that has quietly become this amazing fighter. I think when you saw him win the featherweight title, I don't think people thought it was going to be a super long reign. There was nothing about him that was really outstanding. It was just, it was, hey, he's here. But I mean, the run he's gone on is very impressive. I'm not ignoring that whatsoever going into this fight here, and I'm not ignoring the strength factor. But if you look at his fights, like there's not a lot of weaknesses. Like outside of that one Ortega fight, I'd have to go back and look, but I don't remember a single other fight where Volkanovski was in any sort of major danger. I think the only other close thing is that, like I said, that decision to Holloway, where maybe, again, Holloway was able to do a few things in that fight that maybe would have given him that decision. But outside of that, he's been pretty flawless. Like, he doesn't make many mistakes. That's the one difference in this fight, I think, between Charles Oliveira and Volkanovski, is that you knew Oliveira was getting hit. He got tagged. The Michael Chandler fight, we saw him get tagged in that fight. We knew that striking defense was a weakness of his, but he always found a way to win. In the Islam fight, it caught up to him. Islam was outstriking him. Islam submitted a guy like Charles Oliveira with some of the best ground game in MMA. A guy who's got one of the most submission victories in UFC history. So to go out there, what Islam did to him in finishing him, that was extremely impressive in that fight. So I'm going to keep this simple. Islam, majority of his wins are by submission. I think Islam does what Brian Ortega couldn't, and I think he submits him. But I think it's going to be similar to the Charles fight, where I think at some point, Islam, with his pressure, his strength, he's going to catch Volkanovski at some point. He's going to tag him. And we do know that Volkanovski does have one knockout loss. And granted, this was early in his career. Corey Nelson, I don't know what he's doing now, but he was able to knock him down with a head kick and punches. I could see something similar happening here with Islam. However, I could see him knocking down Volkanovski and then pouncing on with a submission, because again, when Islam gets a hold of you, it's hard to get out of that. He is on you like a pit bull. You have no time to breathe, no time to do anything, to adjust. I think Volkanovski will adjust well, but I still think it's going to be too much. So my pick in this fight is going to be Islam Makhachev by third round submission. I think he does last a round longer than Charles Oliveira. It might even go longer, but I just think with how good Islam looked in his last fight against a guy that I think very highly of in Charles Oliveira, I think he can go out there and do it. I just don't think it's going to be early. I know there's going to be fans in the comments already saying Islam first round finish. I don't think that happens with Volkanovski. All due respect to the opinions of how people are high on Islam, Volkanovski is just an extremely tough guy to finish, and he doesn't make any mistakes. That's the thing. Like, there's very little evidence of Volkanovski making mistakes in fight, and that's why this fight is so interesting. That's why this is one of the best fights in UFC history on paper. I really do feel that way. But like I said, Islam's younger, he's stronger, he's up a weight class, he's in the weight class he's in. He's got a style that no one's been able to figure out. All those things point to Islam winning this fight. So I think 3-1 odds are pretty fair. I think if you're going to bet this fight, look at Islam inside the distance. It's 5 rounds. I think Islam goes in there and silences the crowd and gets a finish over Alex Volkanovski. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. I know what fan base I'm dealing with here. I know you guys are passionate. I know there's going to be people upset about something I said, even though I picked Islam in this fight. And I also know there's going to be people that are watching this that are going to say, oh, you said that Charles was going to destroy Islam. I never said that. Go back and watch the video. I said it was a 50-50 fight. If you go back and watch my breakdown of Islam and Charles, you'll see that I did give a lot of respect to Islam. It's just, unfortunately, when you make any sort of critique of Islam, people start throwing out crazy things like saying that you're racist and all this other nonsense. So let's try and avoid that. Let's talk about the civilly. Again, this is let's look at the positives here. This is one of the best fights in UFC history. Let's enjoy it. Let's soak it in. Let's discuss this. Let's go through the details. Again, there's probably some stuff I missed here, but I just see Islam winning this fight. I don't think Volkanovski is going to pose a threat, just like I don't think Beneil Dariush is going to pose a threat. There's a lot of other fighters out there, but I need to see something different here. I think Volkanovski is going to be about as close as we'll see to giving Islam a challenge right now. I think he's going to be reigning this title for a very long time after that performance over Charles Oliveira. I really feel that way. That's just what my gut tells me. So follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. While you're there, hit that like button, hit that notification bell. I'm posting content on here every single day, so you don't want to be missing anything, right? That's why you got to hit the notification bell. And again, let's have a cool discussion about this. I really believe in you guys. I know we can do it. I know we can go through and talk about this fight back and forth and see what you guys think in terms of all the intangibles. But again, this is just such an awesome fight, and kudos to the UFC for putting this one together. If there's any other fights, by the way, you want me to preview that are coming up, just let me know in the comments. I do typically, get all the main events, but if there's some other interesting fights, let me know. I love doing the show every once in a while, and I can't wait for February. It's right around the corner here. So again, appreciate you tuning in. I'll see you next time, and thanks so much for watching.